Hello, everyone. It is August 6th, 2021. Today's afternoon devotional and Bible study. We're coming at you from Menorah Park once again. Usually I'm sitting on that little bench made out of trees, but I thought, you know what? That makes a good background, so we'll be doing that. Today we're going to be jumping into the book of 1 Kings chapter 11. But before we get to that, we're going to be reading today's devotional from Jesus is Calling. August 6th, Jesus is calling. When things seem to be going all wrong, stop and affirm your trust in me. Calmly bring these matters to me and leave them in my capable hands. Then simply do the next thing. Stay in touch with me through thankful, trusting prayers, resting in my sovereign control. Rejoice in me, exult in the God of your salvation as you trust in me. I make your feet like the feet of a deer. I enable you to walk and make progress upon your high places of trouble, suffering, or responsibility. That was inspired by 3 different sections of the Bible. First is, though he slay me, yet I will trust him. Even so, I defend my own ways before him. Job 13:15. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to stand on the heights. Psalm 18:33. Then lastly, though the fig tree does not blossom and the tree is not there is no fruit on the vines, though the product of olive fails and the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, and there are no cattle in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exult in the victorious God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, my personal bravery, and my invincible arm. He makes my feet like hides, feet that will make me walk, not stand still in terror, but to walk and make spiritual progress upon my high places of trouble, suffering, or responsibility. Habakkuk 17:19. A solid reminder that God is God even when things are going bad. God is God no matter what our circumstances. So, with that, we're going to jump into 1 Kings chapter 11. Hard times are coming. A hard time is coming indeed for King Solomon. So we got this guy, Solomon, son of David, becomes prince. It takes 20 years to build the temple and 20 years to build his palace. He's been, his wisdom is just going all over, like, the known world at this time. And people from all over are coming, and they're bringing gifts of gold to just sit under this guy's learning tree. And he is, like, rich beyond imagination, richer than anyone's ever been before. It even said, like, gold was as common as, like, stones in his kingdom. And, like, yeah, you could still buy stuff with silver and all that jazz, but it was basically worthless because they just were so plentiful. And so we have that going on. And now we're going to be jumping into chapter 11, where Solomon's many wives. So if you remember from our reading earlier on, Solomon was married and got married to the Pharaoh's daughter. So I'm going to move this just slightly. I'm sorry. So now we're going to continue on and find out who else he marries, because Solomon's many wives. Verse 11, or chapter 11, verse 1. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. He married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, "You must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts into their gods." Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord, his God. As his father David had been, Solomon worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians and the Molechs, the detestable god of the Amorites. And in this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. On the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, he even built a pagan shrine for Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and another for Molech, the detestable god of the Amorites. Solomon built such shrines for all his foreign wives to use for burning incense and sacrificing to their gods. The Lord was very angry with Solomon, for his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had warned Solomon specifically about worshiping other gods, but Solomon did not listen to the Lord's command. So now the Lord said to him, "Since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants. But for the sake of your father David, I will not do this while you are still alive. I will take the kingdom away from your son. Even so, I will not take away the entire kingdom. I will let him be king of one of the tribes, for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, my chosen city." Verse 14, Solomon's adversaries. Then the Lord raised up Hadad, the Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to be Solomon's adversary. So, Edomites, they are so it was Jacob and Esau. So this is essentially, the Edomites are Esau's family line. Years before David had defeated Edom, Joab and his army commander had stayed to bury some of the Israelite soldiers who had died in battle. While there, they killed every male in Edom. Joab and the army of Israel had stayed there for 6 months, killing them. But Hadad, a few of his father's royal officers, escaped and headed for Egypt. Hadad was just a boy at the time. They sent out from Midian and went to Paran, where the others joined them. Then they traveled to Egypt and went to Pharaoh, who gave them a home, food, and some land. Pharaoh grew very fond of Hadad, and he gave him his wife's sister in marriage, the sister of Queen Tahpenes. She bore him a son and named him Gunabath. Tahpenes raised him in Pharaoh's palace among Pharaoh's own sons. When the news reached Hadad in Egypt that David and his commander Joab were both dead, he said to Pharaoh, "Let me return to my own country." "Why?" Pharaoh asked. "What do you lack here that makes you want to go home?" "Nothing," he replied. "But even so, please let me return home." God also raised up Rezin, son of Elidah, as Solomon's adversary. Rezin had fled from his master, King Hadadezer of Zobah, and had become the leader of a gang of rebels. After David conquered Hadadezer, Rezin and his men fled to Damascus, where he became king. Rezon was Israel's bitter adversary for the rest of Solomon's reign, and he made trouble just as Hadad did. Rezon hated Israel intensely and continued to reign in Aram. Jeroboam rebels against Solomon. Another rebel leader was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, one of Solomon's own officials. He came from the town of Zerdath in Ephraim, and his mother was Zerah, a widow. So on, good. 27. This is the story behind his rebellion. Solomon was rebuilding and supporting terraces and replacing the walls of the city of his father, David. Jeroboam was a very capable young man, and when Solomon had saw how industrious he was, he put him in charge of the labor force from the tribes of Ephraim and Messiah, the descendants of Joseph. One day, Jeroboam was leaving Jerusalem. The prophet Ahijah from Shinon met him along the way. Ahijah was wearing a new cloak. The two of them were alone in a field. And Ahijah took a hold of the new cloak he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Then he said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 of these pieces, for it is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I will give 10 of the tribes to you. But I will leave him one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel. For Solomon has abandoned me and worshipped Asheroth, the goddess of the Sidonites, Chemosh, the god of Moab, Molech, the god of the Amorites. He has not followed my ways and done what is pleasing in my sight. He has not obeyed my decrees and regulations as David his father did. But I will not take the entire kingdom from Solomon at this time. For the sake of my servant David, the one whom I chose and who obeyed my commands and decrees, I will keep Solomon as leader for the rest of his life. But I will take the kingdom away from his son and give 10 of the tribes to you. His son will have one tribe. His son will have one tribe. So the descendants of David, my servant. Ant, get off of me. Sorry, I have an ant coming on my foot. It's very distracting. So let's continue again from verse 36. His son will have one tribe, so the descendants of David, my servant, will continue to reign, shining like a lamp in Jerusalem, the city I have chosen, to be the place for my name. And I will place you on the throne of Israel, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. That's interesting. Sorry, I'll get back to that in a second. If you listen to what I tell you and follow my ways, and do whatever I consider to be right, and if you obey my decrees and commands, as my servant David did, then I will be with you. I will establish an enduring destiny for you as I did for David, and I will give Israel to you, because Solomon's sin will punish the descendants of David, though not forever. Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, but he fled to King Shishak of Egypt and stayed there until Solomon died. A summary of Solomon's reign. The rest of the events in Solomon's reign, including all his deeds and wisdom, are recorded in the book of the Acts of Solomon. Solomon ruled Jerusalem over Israel for 40 years. When he died, he was buried in the city of David, named for his father. Then his son Rehoboam became the next king. God add a blessing to the reading of his word. All right. So the one thing, it's not in blue. There's a lot of things in blue here. The thing that I thought was interesting is verse 37. I will place you on the throne of Israel, and you will rule over all that your heart desires. this sounds like a foreshadowing of the tempting of Christ. When Jesus went and wandered in the desert, he wandered for 40 days, and Lucifer was like, "Oh, look at this valley. Look over there. See everything the light touches, it will be yours, Mufasa. I mean Simba. I mean Jesus." Just that whole deal seems like it's really foreshadowing part of that temptation. As you know, this story, Lucifer tries to repeat it. He's like, just worship me, and everything that your heart desires will be yours. And Jesus is like, yeah, no. So that was just kind of interesting. That like greed part of things. So I also, now there's a bunch of sections here that are written in blue. And then there's this other section that says reframing Jesus. So let's go over the parts in blue first, and then we'll talk about the reframing Jesus. 1 Kings 11:11. God also raised up Rezin, son of Elidad, Solomon's adversary. Rezin had fled from his master, King Hezadath, from Zoab. Here the Lord must tell one more of his hand-picked leaders that has failed to keep his covenant. Later, the Spirit of Jesus will carve out God's covenant in our hearts, not stone tablets. This moves the law from outside of us to inside of us. So that's a little bit of what that foreshadowed. 1 Kings 11, 14 and 23, which is, then the Lord raised up Hadad from Edomite, a member of Edom's royal family, to Solomon's adversary. Sorry, that plane is super loud. I don't know if it's coming through, but it is super loud. Then verse 23, God also, I read the wrong thing for 11:11. So I was like, I don't understand how that makes sense. Then the God raised up Rezon, son of Eliad, Solomon's adversary. Rezon had fled from his master, the king of Zobah. The Lord raises up adversaries to Solomon. Later, Jesus tells Peter at the Last Supper that he has agreed to allow Satan to sift him for the purpose of revealing the strength of the greater depth. Luke 22:31. So, verse 11:11 is, so now the Lord said to him, since you have not kept my covenant and have disobeyed my decrees, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to one of your ancestors. So that's the whole part of not keeping that command. And one of the things too, Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. And when we're thinking about, okay, so what are the commands of Christ? What are the commands of Christ? I find there's two really great summaries for it. I'm going to actually say three great summaries. Micah 6:8, this is all the Lord requires of you, to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God, which you've heard me quote it in like a bunch of different translations, but that's pretty much that. Jesus gets asked what's the greatest command, and he goes, the laws of the prophets can be summed up by love the Lord your God with all your mind, heart, strength, and soul. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. But then Jesus really ups that to be just not love your neighbor as yourself. Now that we've seen Jesus, he says, a new command I give you, love your neighbor as I have loved you. And that's a much, because so many people are like, oh yeah, love your neighbor as yourself, but I hate myself. You know, I'm like Tony Stark in Age of Avengers. Yes, Ultron was named after him, and he hated Tony Stark because Tony Stark hates himself. See, I hate myself too, and it's like, okay, but Jesus doesn't. Jesus loves you. He was willing to live for you. He was willing to die for you because he loved you. And so we got that. And then there's this other section right here, 1 Kings 11, 1 to 13. This is the reframing Jesus part. A lasting dependence on Jesus. Solomon's great failing is that he comes to trust his wealth more than God. So much so, he doesn't think twice about building shrines to other gods. The mighty kingdom would split in two and fall apart because of Solomon's faithlessness. He started out so promising, though he'd once had the greatest wisdom in all the world. His life becomes a sad memory of what happens when we lose sight of our dependence on Jesus and try to take care of ourselves. Our lives can reflect the trust in God, that Jesus encouraged and Solomon couldn't muster. If God can provide his best for those who have no means to provide for themselves, surely we can trust him rather than running to a false god to provide our security. And I think that's pretty important. I got a little bit distracted by by kind of gust of wind and stuff. I want to read that one more time. Especially, this is the part where King Solomon had 700 wives. Like, what? That is way too many. Solomon's great failing is that he comes to trust his wealth more than God. So much so that he doesn't think twice about building shrines to other gods. The mighty kingdom would split in two and fall apart because of Solomon's faithlessness. He started out so promising, though he had the greatest wisdom in the world. His life becomes a sad memory of what happens when we lose sight of our dependence on Jesus and try to take care of ourselves. Our lives can reflect the trust in God that Jesus encouraged and Solomon couldn't muster. If God can provide his best for those who have no means to provide for themselves, surely we can trust him rather than running to a false god to provide our security. And yeah, I think that's mighty important. So, God gave him all of this richness. He was super wise. But once again, we see how we still have choices to make. We still have the ability to choose this, that, or the other. And Solomon was super wise. Super, super wise. But he let his wealth, I would say he let his lust, having 300 concubines and 700 wives, that is ridiculous. How is he going to actually have love or affection for any of them? And they're not going to have any of their needs really met besides money. All right? I can look after you financially. But then, where's the heart of things? And we see in Scripture that, women weren't just like sitting back going like, yeah, okay, well, I understand my place in the world today. I don't really care. No, they still had hearts. They had feelings. They had emotions. Like, they didn't just all of a sudden develop that. That's something that we were created with. Man and women were created with that. So it's not one of those things that just kind of developed later on in life. And we see the heart and the desire for women to be loved, because there was that one story where the one woman was they were having kids, but they weren't spending any time with the prophet. We read it not that long ago. I'm totally drawing a blank on what it is. But there was that, like, I want you to pay attention to me. Like, you married me and I want you to pay attention to me. But he had two wives and he favored one over the other, and it was heartbreaking for her. And we read her story. And I'm totally drawing a blank on the story. I'm just remembering those points. So I'm sorry. We read it a few months ago. So I am sorry about that. I want to say it was like Rebecca. Was it that story? Was it Moses? I'm drawing a blank. I'm sorry. So, like, it was definitely a different time, a different area, but it wasn't like this unheard of thing. So you have King Solomon now, who's now has 700 wives, can't really look after them, But he's like, well, you really like to worship this God, so yeah, I'll make you a shrine over here. And he just kind of lost sight of who he was because he just had too much wealth, too much power, and literally anyone he wanted would be his. And he took his wisdom and he ended up abusing it, and he lost sight. And not only does it end up making it so that his son ends up losing his kingdom, but it divides the nation. His actions have impacted beyond just himself and his family. So it's that reminder with us that, we can pursue things that we want, but if we take our eyes off of Christ and we start putting these false idols in those places, we're ultimately going to fall short, and it's probably going to end up hurting somebody beyond just ourselves and not in a way that we intended. And that's one of the reasons I really love Jesus' golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So actively love others. Actively show care and compassion. Or that new rule I give to you that I talked about just a little bit ago is love others as Christ loved them. And there's a lot, when we're following God, he asks us to be that new agey, it's not even new agey, I don't know. But the way that it's retold is be the change that you want to see in the world. And this is a very old principle that comes from Jesus' time. It's just reworded slightly differently. And it sounds cliche, but I think it is real. And even, and as we read in our devotional, just because we're following God doesn't mean that we're going to be without trouble. Quite the opposite. Jesus actually says, in this life we will have trouble, but it's that we can walk with God through it. So no matter how good things get, like things seem to be getting with Solomon, he lost sight. No matter how bad things get, we can't lose sight of Jesus, because he is with us and he'll carry us through the good, the bad, and the boring. So let's pray. AJC, awesome Jesus Christ, thank you for loving us during the good, the bad, and the boring. Thank you that we could be here, Menorah Park, have the water kind of glisten in the background and everything, and that I can read your word, that we can read your word online together in this form. And I lift up everyone that tunes in, especially that makes it this far. Lord, bring a blessing to us today. Comfort us, challenge us, and let us know that you are near. If things are going amazing, Lord, help us to remember to stay focused on you. And if things are just super hard and it takes all of our strength just to get out of bed and have a shower, then help us to still stay focused on you and have you in our mind when it becomes next to impossible to take that next step. Lord, let us not lean on false gods to get us through, whether it's in good, bad, or boring times. Let us not lose sight of you. And Lord, you brought up adversaries against Solomon, even though he was supposed to be your king. And there are times when adversaries rise up around us, and let us still stay focused on you as you guide and direct us as we take the next steps going forward. Lord, you are awesome. I thank you so much for all the ways that you love us, you guide us, and you direct us. Lord, thank you. Thank you. Amen. All right. Well, have a fantastic day. Thank you once again for joining me. Look forward to reading through chapter 12 tomorrow. And later. God bless.